Good evening. Hello? Is this working? Good. I want to welcome the customary small and select crowd to this spring's student lecture series at SCI-Arc entitled Architecture, Dreams, Beliefs, and Fantasies. The idea of this series was to generate some debate both among the participants and among the audience by pairing together architects who shared common interests or shared common questions about the making of architecture, but were at completely different places in their career or completely different places in the country. And the pairing next, in the next event, which will take place on March 6th, will bring together Gary Page, who's an instructor at this school, and Raymond Abrahams from the Cooper Union in New York. Tonight we have two architects, or one architect and one architecture office, one troika, with us. Antoine Predock from Albuquerque, New Mexico and Los Angeles, and the Central Office of Architecture from Los Angeles. Both of these architects, though they are very different places in their career, Antoine Predock is a distinguished practitioner who has received numerous AIA and honor awards and PA awards, was a Rome Fellow several years ago, whereas the three young members of COA are just now seeing their first buildings completed, share an interest not just in making buildings, but in a theory and practice of architecture that questions the fundamental aspects of how one can and should make a building in the specific location of the American Southwest in the late 20th century. They, in many ways, are at a different end of the spectrum, as I've said, but both have an interest that tries to add a certain kind of meaning in addition to the mere act of building, whereas Antoine Predock is interested in the more mythic overtones that can be created in architecture. The Central Office of Architecture produces a narrative out of the constellation of modernist elements that they assemble in their buildings. Both of these interests in doing something more than just plunking a building down come out of, I think, a very thorough reading of the specific place in which they are building. Antoine Predock is interested in the Southwest for all of its mythic overtones, for its vast landscape, for its long history of human habitation dwarfed by that vast landscape. Whereas the Central Office of Architecture looks rather to the way in which the rational technological means of colonization have created a different place out of the American Southwest. One can thereby say that they are both interested in a kind of vernacular. Antoine Predock in a vernacular that tries to mimic the existing landscape, and the Central Office of Architecture are interested in a vernacular that looks at the mass-produced elements of a highly refined technology as the building blocks for current architecture. Beyond that starting point, I would say they diverge very far. The one thing that does keep bringing them back towards an interest beyond making buildings as a service industry is an interest in the manipulation of the visual field, in the ways in which architecture primarily is an ordering and a reordering of our visual field that can make us aware that there might be a possibility of constructing something beyond the status quo. Now, these two people are going to both give separate presentations, and before they do, I would like to just tell you who they are very briefly. Antoine Predock, as I said, is a distinguished practitioner who has been working since 1967 in Albuquerque and has recently opened a second office in Los Angeles. He started out in the aerospace industry and since then has expanded to a variety of architectural endeavors. His buildings are, as usual, too numerous to mention, but I would just point out that in his office here in Los Angeles, he is working on several large projects, including a new performing arts center for the city of Thousand Oaks and a very large housing project at the Northwest campus of UCLA. and no doubt he will show you some of his other recent projects in this area. The Central Office of Architecture is made up of 3 people, Ron Golan, Eric Kahn, and Russell Thomsen. One wonders what they all have in common, other than the fact that they're all roughly the same age and they all went to the Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo together, graduated there in 1981, every single one of them. After that, they each went their separate way. Ron Golan came to SCI-Arc and actually graduated from SCI-Arc. The Eric Kahn went on to work for Super Studio in Florence, for Morphosis here in Los Angeles, and also for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in Los Angeles. Russell Thomsen went on to work also for Super Studio, then for Mark Mack in San Francisco and Richard Meyer in Los Angeles. They, since forming their office several years ago, called the Central Office of Architecture, they have engaged in a series of different projects, both small-scale residential and now also a restaurant design just completed on Washington Boulevard, but also theoretical, and some of the more provocative work has occurred in their theoretical projects for Off-Ramp magazine, for a recent show at the Barnsdale, and in a publication called Recombinant Images in Los Angeles, about which they hope they will be speaking. Though that is the cast of characters, we will allow them to present their work. I might start things off with a few questions and then open up the field. With that, I hope you will help me welcome Antoine Predock.
Thanks, Aaron. That's the aerospace industry part there. So I'm looking at it all black, mostly black, blue, white, different.
Give us 20 there.
What do you do here? Do you turn the lights all the way out, or you part way down, or what?
You tell them to turn the lights down.
For about 30 years since I started going to the University of New Mexico to study architecture, I've been working in the Bermuda Triangle between Albuquerque, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. And in the that Bermuda Triangle, that branch, you run into everything from cattle mutilations. I don't know if you hear about those over here. It's way beyond just spotting a UFO once in a while. It's a fairly active involvement that they take in northern New Mexico. Usually follow the residue is usually kind of a silvery powder around this site of surgical intervention on these cows. And in working in that Bermuda Triangle, I think of a road cut, and I've talked about it in different ways. And I think there's one in LA, but the one in New Mexico starts with Precambrian granite, goes through sedimentary strata, limestone, through sandstone. Cultural artifacts start turning up, Anasazi traces. Then the Conquistadores remnants, some 30s hubcaps start showing up. McDonald's wrappers, those plastic six-pack rings, and on top of that, the vapor of UFOs. So in thinking about making architecture there, it's fairly rich turf, and having been there for as long as I have, it's a reflex to let that understanding of that place inform work in other places. So I'm going to go through, this will be, I guess, sort of a processy presentation, and I want to show how I start projects, how I think about them, and show a few built things thrown into the process flow. So things happen out there. I mean, that like on the right, and if you're lucky, you spot things like on the left. So this isn't going to be a retrospective going on forever, I promise. But I'm starting with my first project since '67. Can you focus on the left? Somebody's going to really stay on top of the focus, right? Or should I do it? Maybe I should actually do it. my first project, La Luz, means the light, fell into my lap, and the year I got registered, and it was a site of 500 acres, and the understanding that I had with my clients, young developers who'd never done it before, was that I was interested in a site that had a, I didn't call it a preservation ethic at that time, but it was, I guess you'd call it that now. I wanted to save a floodplain and protect it and use materials that came out of the earth into the wall, so it was made of adobe. You can see our adobe yard on the right, the adobe bricks in various degrees of curing, and a drawing on the way that I was working on for the first build-out, which was finally 100 units, the part that is rendered in a more detailed fashion, and that was back when I was doing those drawings myself too, is added onto by a sketch relating to an oncoming phase on the bottom. So this project related to the Rio Grande Valley, the floodplain, left it alone, left the bosque along the river alone, built on the high ground with units that sectionally looked over other units, and really steered away from Santa Fe cuteness, Santa Fe cute adobe. There's cute adobe and there's real adobe. I think that John Lautner is talking about real architecture and some other kind of architecture, and I don't know if there's a relationship, but there's Santa Fe is full of cute adobe, and it's kind of scenographic. This was real adobe, and they were modern buildings that had an attitude about site that was defensive, protecting the inner realms, the semi-public, semi-private inner realms from harsh winds in the spring and from low sun angles, turning blank walls to the west. And you can see the real adobe walls there. They're 16 inches thick. The adobe units are 4 by 10 by 14, and so they're turned the long way to generate really thick party walls for this housing. It's all housing. And it's to stabilize it. It is plastered, and that's the same shot on the right. So it's about closure and a defensive posture against the elements in that site, that windswept site, and inner realms within that are to be discovered in a labyrinth-like way. So that was the idea of making an architecture that was, in a way, a surrogate landscape. The silhouette of La Luz viewed against the mesa, West Mesa of Albuquerque, reads like a mesa. It's sort of an extension of scarps that are already descending toward the river. So this idea of landscape architecture as landscape and drag came out, and so I did a building in Tallahassee Valley, and I decided to prove that theory by skiing the building. So the roof, you can get good air off the higher roof plane, and that's the right slide. There's a third slide I'm not showing. So architecture's landscape and drag, architecture that I think Aaron said mimics. I'm not sure it mimics. It kind of extrapolates from, transcends maybe, or has a rough relationship to literal landform. In this case, a house completes the X of the Rio Hondo Canyon in a model study and later on in the house. And I want to talk about the drawing too along the way, and about how I like to make innocent marks, as innocent as possible. And I think this is an example of one. It's a house on a ridge near Santa Fe where a line along the ridge, more or less following the contour of the ridge, became the backbone of the house, and trying to construct it geometrically never worked, so the line was blown up photographically to be the basis for a floor plan drawing. So that idea of innocent mark, and so I want to relate that back to skiing. This is also a sermon, because I heard at SCI-Arc that some people think that working out, like running or jogging or running, is a bourgeois activity and a hedonistic pursuit. And I wanted you to know that I do all that, and I'm a culprit. And because it's all architecture to me, skiing is architecture, and rollerblading, which I do with a colleague here in LA now. We do 15 milers on along the Strand in Venice and Malibu. It's really important to keep, it keeps your brain cooking. So I'm not embarrassed about that. And a ski is a good example of vehicle to talk about the innocent mark, the innocent line. A ski has a narrow waist, a thick shovel, and a tail that's wider than the waist. When the ski is cambered, it's like a big long arc. When you load a ski and you're moving at certain speed, the ski goes into reverse camber. In other words, the positive camber becomes a negative camber. And the negative camber then describes an arc in the snow. If the ski is perfectly weighted, if in fact the move is from tail to waist to shovel, as it properly should be, there's a wonderful feeling, exhilaration, and it's called a carved turn. And a lot of skiers turn by sliding, and that wouldn't be an innocent mark. That would be a self-conscious mark. That wouldn't really be about architecture. But the carved turn is more about architecture because it's that feeling of exhilaration you get, during a charrette when something's happening, when a move you've made, whether it's a drawing or a model move or a move in your head, your feelings, it's like that. And I want to show marks like that. The diagonal mark on the right slide is a carved turn. Then the mark in powder snow, the mark is more diffuse because the snow is very light, and the carved turn the feeling is a little spongier. You're not sort of more forceful way edging one ski. There's a feeling of dancing, and it's a choreographic thing. So that kind of innocent mark that's so pure, that's a carved ski mark, or think of it as maybe a tennis swing that's grooved in perfectly. I don't include golf, but tennis maybe. And the hedonistic litany would be okay with me. And you can name your own. I don't call them sports. I call them arts, if they're practiced at these levels. So then I wanted to. When I was in Rome, I tried to draw as innocently as I could. In fact, I tried to sign buildings. I drew the Pantheon many times. This is from the vantage point, same vantage point as in the opening scene of Belle Even Architect, looking back across the Piazzale toward the Portico, and this is what happened to me in Rome more than kind of looking at pastiche elements to kind of bring back and trot out. It was feeling the buildings. The Pantheon has great power. It truly is an urban UFO. One night I saw purplish light beamed out of the oculus toward the sky. Actually, I did see that. And so I drew it many times, and finally the mark became like a signature. So I think for students, I think it's good to understand that maybe that your drawings can feel like your signature. First of all, your signature has to be right. You have to be proud of it. It feels like it comes from your own inner resonance, from your own personal tuning fork, and that it's convincing to you. And then you can test your drawings against that mark you make. And it's a lifelong pursuit, because I don't think I'm getting closer. Like out the train window, looking out the train window in Umbria on the right, the signature of that village. And then the kind of mark, I like to translate those thinking about the innocent mark, understanding a move, and whether it's your hand or your body. I like to move on sites that way. I like to, in case of this house, which was about 6 or 8 years ago in New Mexico, I ran the site a number of times, pivoting and turning to understand which way the great views were, to understand wind direction, solar orientation, till finally there were tracks up the hillside that I could scratch a stick into, and it became the plan. There was never a plan before the running up and down the hill happened, and then it was translated into a model, and it got built. Then the other thing is going to a site and finding, discovering essences of sight by lying around there, by actually getting on site, viscerally connecting with sight in a kind of, I guess, closet geomancer way. I think the science of geomancy evolved from some intuitive power that a great master had that became quantified in books later. And I think we all have, intrinsically have geomancer's soul if we can discover it. So I like to go to a site, and that's the kind of cosmological diagram on the right that I'm drawing under the rock, under that rock till I heard there was a big snake that they caught under it, and I bailed out of there after that. But it was my studio in Phoenix for a while, working on the project. It's important to camp out on projects, and I must admit, it was when we camped out here, it was in a Winnebago. But we weren't in a hotel in Scottsdale. It was right on the site, and experienced the site. So the drawing on the right links elements on the site that have power, particular groupings of rocks, particular trees. That when you experience landscape, there is an iconography that is projects the power of that landscape, and you can single out elements just as you can in an urban iconography. So then to talk about drawing and projecting it into a larger project, this is a competition we were invited to enter last year for Agadir, Morocco. It was a long list including Rim Koolhaus, Shinohara from Tokyo, Domenech from Barcelona, El Wakil from Cairo, and we were the only American firm. And it was juried by a good jury, international jury, and it was cut to 3, and now it's Rim Koolhaus and us and Roland Simonet, the designer of the Picasso Museum in Paris. So we're the final 3, and it was turned in a long time ago. The final call would be made by the King of Morocco, King Hassan II, and he's very distracted now, obviously, and he hasn't done it. And besides I don't know how it is being an American anymore on this one, but he hasn't decided. I know that we're in good standing with the developers that are going to do this. They like it, and it'll be. I hope it doesn't get political. So it was a quick trip to a site to do the things I just talked about, to feel the site with my body, measure my body against it, walk the site, a great dune line along the Atlantic in Agadir, south of Casablanca. The left slide, you can see the dune line and the Atlantic. And then that drawing was done on the left, was done on a plane between Agadir and Rabat, flying back. We had a 2-day visit, then a very quick turn-in for the first phase of a 2-stage competition. The second I got back, I made that collage on the right, which is about the length of this white wall on butcher paper, to translate essences of sight, which you see diagrammed on the left, the scimitar-like form, that it's a breakwater extending into the ocean. I tried to understand as much as I could Islamic cosmology and what was that zoomed down the side? So there's Bab Mecca Gateway. There's Bab Hrub, Sunset Gateway. Qamar, the moon tower. Their year is based on the lunar year, lunar calendar. So all those are translated into that collage piece on the right that began to suggest a scheme. And if you can blur your eyes, you'll see these very first attempts at understanding sight, where the green sward is a swath of eucalyptus trees that guards the dune line from winds and also stabilizes the soil behind the dune line. So that had to be preserved. The idea was to develop this resort. It's a resort with great conference halls, exhibit halls, royal salon, royal chambers, hotels, up to 3,000 rooms, I believe, in the master plan, and in the first phase, 700,000 square foot building. So what worked was I came back, did the collage, and then immediately I built this model. I like to work in Roma Plastilina, that gray clay. On the right's a sketch of the piece positioned along the shore, lineally arrayed along the groundwater source, establishing series of riads or courtyards, water-oriented courtyards, and hurling the breakwater into the sea from the axis that leads back to town. That was a given. And doing drawings along the way as I worked on the model. And the model was jumped into more permanent materials, but really scaled from my clay model. The way it's hard when you have, I have about 30 people on my staff now, and a lot of projects all over the place, always traveling. And the way I stay connected is that the first moves are from me in clay models, and then drawings that go along with them that accompany those model studies. And then the models are literally constructed using calipers and scale relationships and other materials, but keeping hopefully the innocent marks that I left in clay. So there you see of course the moon is played up here, and you can see a big lighter there, the sunset tower, Bab Horub, and the Scirocco blowing off the desert on the right, blowing through the central Sahat, which is the arc described. The arc of the Sahat tracks a sundial pointer, which is a titanium pointer that's just peeking above the... is there a pointer at SCI-Arc? No way, right? Not a chance. To the left of the flame, there's a tip of the titanium sundial pointer. There are solstice alignments that position apertures. You can see Bob Mecca, the Mecca gateway, is the slot from which water issues between the two light chambers that are the entry vertical circulation elements, with the Royal Salon atop that. That sort of trapezoidal arc on one side. So the drawing, the model, this is the Rio Grande Nature Center, where I thought more about apertures than windows for the first time, where it really became an issue, where in this Rio Grande Nature Center context, the galleries looked out, you gaze out through apertures toward very specific, you nail the views, you nail interpretive fragments of either landscape or water surface with interpretive material behind it for kids. It's the kids-oriented building. You enter through a drainage culvert, through a berm on the other side. It's kind of a non-building on the other side. And these apertures frame particular views, forage areas where the birds are, food chain diagrams on that pyramid inside. The gallery within is surrounded by water tubes, which are thermal storage devices. The whole passive response part of architecture I won't dwell on, but it's automatic working in the Southwest, and it should be here too. There should be attitudes about that take it beyond. But on the other hand, passive fetishism was rampant in the Southwest in the 70s, and it got to be where you had to have, 55-gallon water-filled drums in your living room, or you weren't an architect. So I think there's a balance, and I won't talk a lot about that, but it's in all the work. The adobe building, the thermal storage capacity of this building, the stability of the water, in combination with the mass of the walls, the thickness of the walls. It's very energy responsible. It looks like Halloween 3 at night. And the apertures go out to particularized fragments of landscape and sky, geology, mountains. But they also go underwater, and that's a periscope that looks below the pond, featuring a fish on a leash. Since there were no fish, we hang around that periscope. It's an aperture in the concrete wall, like you make a model, little model periscope for your models. It looks under the water. Project in Wyoming that's going ahead now after some delay. The American Heritage Center first studies big butcher paper drawing on the left, probably the most important drawings upper left, where you see a mountain, a real mountain, a surrogate mountain, an archival mountain in this case. That's the American Heritage Center, American Archive, and the axial relationship of the center to that mountain, and then the model translating that on through other studies to the cone is an asymmetrical cone. It's stretched to allow a common area where you see the triangular slot on the left, on my drawing on the left, focusing into a common area where the skirt is stretched out of the cone for common space, and the archive is to the left, and on the right, the long low piece is the art museum. It's a 130,000 square foot program, double functioning program. Those trial and error cone pieces you saw were studied at different scales and ended up in this model on the left, which is how it is now in working drawings. The conical piece is lead, dull hammered lead. The low-lying elements are brick. There's a brick source there and a color that works great with gravel I collected from a canyon road cut in that area. The interstitial zones of the cone where you have reveals cutting back in are face brick linings. And the galleries on the right, the left slide, the low part, I call them the piano keys, are jumbo brick, but the same clay as the face brick that cuts into the mountain. The archival mountain then, smoke comes out, sort of like a volcano of knowledge. You have the archive below, the base, the datum, the mesa from which the cone and the village of galleries arise, and then the archival magma within the volcano smoking, as the drawing I did earlier showed. And then on the right, the naked realm within, the city within, cruised by pterodactyl. So that project's happening. And the kind of drawings I do range from, like we all do, trace. You think they're throwaways, but then you end up liking them more than your presentation drawings or napkin drawings or back of envelope drawings. And I can also do user-friendly drawings, like on the left, because these models scared the trustees at Wyoming a little bit when I first saw them. It was a competition that I won, and even despite that, they gave me a very hard time, and I had to jump through a lot of hoops to convince them it wasn't a teepee. I thought that was a noble reading, actually, because we revere those kinds of associations. Where I come from in New Mexico, Native American architecture, of course, is profoundly rooted in place and a great inspiration to me, and so is nomadic Native American architecture. But that wasn't the point of this. It was to make a mountain, not a teepee. Teepee-like, I kind of blew it by having those trees, which are topiary spruce trees, 50 feet tall, eventually trimmed in topiary fashion. So that kind of got me in trouble because they look like teepees to them. This is an LA project that never happened, but led to something else that did happen. It's called the Land Shark. It's a lifeguard tower for the LA beaches. It was in that exhibit that Michael and Tom were in, Kirsten Kaiser's gallery. And when I started looking at it, I thought, well, the form is pretty much there in the existing stations, but there ought to be some relationship to things out in the water. So the Land Shark grew out of that. It's Kevlar mesh on a Columbus tubing frame, like bicycle kind of construction. Kevlar mesh has no mass, so the black's fine. It's good. In fact, it's good for glare reduction. There's no thermal capacity, so it can't burn you when you touch it. It's like the lifeguard's sort of like being living in shades without having to wear any. That metamorphosed into, this didn't get built, into the spectral slug, which was a piece I did for the Des Moines Art Center, piece they commissioned. Robert and Marianne also had a piece in that, and Todd and Billy also. And the spectral slug was about a little journey for kids, and it's very cheap. That's just flexed masonite. The tunnel's flexed masonite. The ground plane are handballs, crunchy handballs, solid, close packed. Upper ramp, there's a blower up in the top right, blowing air. It's plugged into the grid of the gallery in the Walker and the Des Moines Art Center. So you climb against the wind, kids going through spectral colors, which are plex, across a goldfish bowl. You can see it's slung below, 5-foot diameter goldfish bowl with fish swimming below, with a plexiglass floor plane there. Then you slide down a ramp and out the other side, and there it is installed in Des Moines. You can't see the fish too well. You can see them a little bit in the left slide. I hope the Land Shark gets built also. I mean, it needs to be a critical mass of them in Malibu especially. About 4 in a row would be minimum. And the music of Jaws would be playing below them. It would be do, 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 do. The first start of I think that's a fairly innocent mark on the right. That's the Fine Arts Center at Arizona State University. The slide should be flipped, so it's reversed. A lot of notes. This was a crash and burn competition just back from Rome, out of work, invited to do this competition against Erickson, Barnes, and Barton Myers. And it's a spectacular project, spectacular site, great program. And it got built. We won the competition. Building that's very processional. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was dance. I was married to a dancer for a long time, and we had a company, and we worked with Anna Halpern and San Francisco Dancers Workshop during my internship up there, working in architecture with Jerry McHugh in San Francisco. And understanding that, you know, Anna Halpern, I think really the scoring comes from Anna Halpern, really not so much from Lawrence. The idea of scoring architecture is omnipresent in my feelings. I don't think I single it out anymore as a methodology, but scoring can involve so many things. This is a highly processional building. It has a gateway mandate. The twin towers and the steel armature that spans between them are a signal gateway from a street. I'm talking about the right slide, or either one of them on the left would be the street. Banners can be hung in that aperture. Projections can be done from the high armature against the stagehouse wall, like you see on the right. There's the desert, the naked desert building that has respite from the blazing sun in trellised areas and shady retreat, and also the nocturnal building that has a celebratory aspect. One of the slides I used in the competition jury was a big ruche projected on the stagehouse wall. You can see how I extended the stagehouse wall as a blade to receive projections. I think the drive-in movie screen is a vanishing icon of the West, and so it came back in this project. You can see that projections there from Mill Avenue out in front, and they wouldn't let me put drive-in speakers in the parking spaces in the parking lot. But it reads as a drive-in movie screen when going by, and artists have done pieces on it, and they use it for PR for theater events that are upcoming. That projection on the right isn't right. It really should be higher. Tim Hersley did that when he did this shot, and I didn't like where he positioned it. It should be up on the blade more. You can see the centerpiece, that bleacher-like thing it's an open riser seating system that admits light to a space below. When I got back from Rome, I was using fancy words like nymphaeum. I called it nymphaeum because it was associated with water, filtered light, mystery, and thermal stability like the nymphaea of antiquity. So you come through a columnar hall, light spilling in from above through the gapped risers that are seating, so that seating becomes louvers. There's great inductive airflow up and out through those louvers, good flushing effect. There's a 10-degree temperature drop from ground plane to this subterranean museum entry. Then the stair back up to the galleries from the subterranean realm to ascending to light, to top lit galleries, and then one of the passages on the right between pieces of the scheme. At night, it's like a fixture. I don't like to do light fixtures, you know, that you stick on. The whole building becomes a fixture. It glows from within. The lacy trellis patterns like Palo Verde, shadows of Palo Verde leaves on the desert floor, and the cave-like shade of areas flanking that bleacher that were more like that rock I was drawing under in the desert north of Phoenix. Then the Ship of the Desert in Las Vegas, my first Las Vegas project, and paralleling this, coming along right behind it, was a library and kids museum that I'll show in a minute. Ship of the Desert, as though it had kind of blown across the desert, lodged in an arroyo, a dry wash. It's an information center for a new community. Lodging in the dry wash, it has various guises: ship, lantern, beacon. When the flame of the fire on the upper deck, the promenade deck of the ship, illuminates the sail. There's a sail reading, a tent reading. You can climb a mill-finished stainless steel armature, trussed armature, to gain a vantage point 80 feet above the desert floor to look back across Las Vegas to the lights of Las Vegas, the other lights of Las Vegas. So it's another kind of light for Las Vegas. You can see how the entry works. You walk up the arroyo from parking, enter up into the underbelly, ascend through exhibit and orientation spaces to the gallery, which has call those shark gill windows, the vertical windows, and the promenade deck above, culminating in an elliptical stainless steel platter that has randomized gas jets. This was for Howard Hughes Company, and figured they could afford that randomized gas jet, so that it looked like napalm. When the flames were on, the flames were dancing on this elliptical stainless steel plate, glowing like on the right. It's on axis with Lone Mountain, which is a site of a known confirmed UFO base on the north side of it. Lone Mountain's in the distance on the right slide. I'll show a few local projects. We have 8 projects in California now, different stages of completion. So the Forum Theater in La Jolla. Going to the theater, I've always thought was very ceremonial. There's a new ceremony that is necessary for me now that led to carving out a clearing in a eucalyptus forest. This was it's on the south end of the campus. It's not in the kind of quasi-urban grid area of the campus. It's on the other end. So the clearing in the eucalyptus forest and a 230-foot-long mirror, 13 feet high, reflecting the clearing, reflecting the oncoming patrons of the theater, creating an ambiguity, a threshold that blurs the line between performer and spectator. So you see each other collectively moving through the trees into the building. You pass through a void, up a switchback ramp to the playhouse beyond. So you go through the looking glass. You pop out again. This is a black steel, can't point up that far, but cantilevered balcony that projects through the glass, levitating, black steel piece levitating on the mirrored surface at a distance that you'd pop out onto, so that further, it's another kind of layer of ambiguity about audience and performer. And then finally you'd go right into a thrust stage playhouse with rehearsal rooms wrapping around, adjusting to the parallel to the face of the main library and campus. And it's way along. That's just a primer. That'll be a dark gray, and you won't see that through the mirrored glass. It's detached from the plane of the building. It's just a floater, 230 feet long, 13 feet high. The purplish black stucco, integrally colored stucco, is on the canopy that cantilevers over from the higher landing of the ramps. You see on the left slide will be black, flat black, and the ramp system going up will be black. It's all exposed steel. And the first panel is the glass panel. I mean, it's nothing till the glass is there, right? It's not happening at all. But they're about to go in the next week. Here the building going into construction now. We just bid this building. It's at Cal Poly Pomona. It's the gateway building for campus. And the first drawings were big butcher paper drawings on a napkin on an airline flight back to Albuquerque on the right that really kind of set the partie. And then I did a clay model on the right that you see translated into the building that's going to be built on the left in the model. This was a competition. We won in '87. It's a 200,000 square foot gateway building. It's the administrative center for campus, the computer mainframe, instructional television, computer laboratories, self-instructional laboratories. And you can see the relationship of the first model more or less to the scheme as will be built. That's the Sky Theater at the apex of the tower. Those humanoids up there that look like they're sliding off are in the Sky Theater. And we thought that there'd be every year some ceremonial pig roast because we didn't want Cal Poly to forget that it was an ag school. Well, don't boo, because they have what they have a meat lab there. It says on the building, meat lab. And so they're proud of their meat, and we're going to get some from the meat lab and get that pig and put it up there. And the Sky Theater is, I fly into LAX a lot. I always get an F seat on the right because I like to look to the right more than I like to look to the left. And for years I looked down on this site, and then I realized that, gosh, if I can see that site, they must be able to see me too. So that's really a viewing platform for the 747s 1 mile apart, lumbering in across the LA basin. It's a great airplane watching area. And I like to do that very much. I think that's part of architecture also. That's my aerospace background that Aaron referred to. Besides that first shot I showed, was on the F4 project before I ever knew what F4s would finally end up doing. Working as a grunt runner calculator when I was an engineering student, and had a job in McDonnell Aircraft in the summers and worked on that project. You know, the object, like the stealth or any of those objects, are incredibly beautiful, and I guess I've learned to detach myself from the ends they're put to and think of their incredible, I mean, they're innocent marks actually, until you do something with them. Here in town, UCLA housing, a triangular piece wedged into a hillside, 400 units, and then a long arcade-like spine running into it. There was a pointer here. Michael, I'll donate a pointer to SCI-Arc. It'll be a stick, you know, but I'll donate a pointer. The long wall, which sprouts canopies for outdoor performances, those canopies are related to a theater and to the entry to an office building, a residential life office building. That's in construction. Moving along, there's the long wall. Pieces that extend out beyond it, the wedge into the hillside, retail, along with the housing. Chris is here. I think the bridge looks okay in that model. We were thinking about taking it out, but I think it's okay. This is a very an inside thing, but Chris, you should look at that right now. You got 2 more seconds. Chris, Haji, and Doug, my LA studio, are here, and they're fantastic architects. Then you see the long tilted square, triangular square, in the housing element that slopes up. The views are fantastic in that they look out over other elements of this Northwest housing thing, a Barton Mars project, a Joe Esherick project, to the San Gabriel Mountains in the distance. We have a great site because we're way up on a hillside looking out and over. And that's, I don't have any construction shots of that, but it's about 2/3 finished. A project that was recently built here, a house in Venice Beach. I didn't know exactly what to do in a 30 by 90 lot. I usually get these tabula rasa, big blank empty canvas sites in the middle of nowhere, you know, in the Southwest, in the Bermuda Triangle. And to have a 30 by 90 constraint actually was great because it became a site of imagination within. It became a different process, different understanding of place. But I did think about the road cut. I thought about LA as a timeless place and not just about temporality, glitz, and disposability. I thought of its timelessness, and so I thought about granite, poured-in-place concrete, bones, water, sky. And first I thought the wall to the beach, to the ocean, should just be a poured-in-place concrete wall without any apertures in it. And my client didn't like that idea too much because the sites are expensive there. So then I thought I'd customize the apertures to his kind of a horoscope thing and also a cosmological thing where the apertures began to describe him in some way. You know, that look at a certain constellation on his birthday, maybe, or anyway, that didn't get too far either because they were too small and you couldn't see the ocean. So, but the very first thing, the city procession in Japan stayed, and I'll show you how they stayed. The Japan, aspiring to Japan, he's a 747 pilot that flew for Flying Tigers and made the Japan run a lot, the Asian run a lot. So he liked the idea of a big red window, 2,000-pound red window that was painted the color of the Japanese flag that pivoted. And he liked the idea of a collapsed perspective where the ray that is a black granite ray that connects with the black granite of the water piece in front behind that singing group would connect spiritually to place through. I found a piece of granite. It isn't black granite actually. It's a piece of granite I found in the ocean front. Later been a piece of breakwater that we polished, and it's a real dark gray granite, so it's something that was there, found along the way, and coated with water, where you see the water ray crossing the water, well, that's the water piece that you see behind them. So the perspectival collapse that happens because of the reverse perspective draws the ocean in, and it sets up a viewing condition where you appreciate the ocean down this runway, this conceptual runway to Japan, that makes reverses the perspective. Coming back the other way, it's Borromini special. It's an exaggerated perspective. So the glistening granite, the granite on the water at the point where the pivot window occurs, the glistening sea beyond, the merging of sea and sky that happens so often on this part of the coast that's so fabulous, all aids and abets the strategy of this collapse and of this union with sea, sky, and place. And one of the proudest things about this this project is the pivot units that we made in Albuquerque. We couldn't find the right fabricator here. We don't have all of the inside sources yet here. Some people enjoy, but but what?
One more month.
Okay. Okay, I'm still a carpetbagger, I know. So hell, we can make pivots in Albuquerque. We made the window, the 2,000-pound frame in Albuquerque, trucked it over. You should see me trying to get through airport security with that pivot in my bag. When it's assembled, it looks like a satellite. You can see the Nelson studs welded to the pivot housing, and all that's gone now, sadly, and you can barely see them peeking out, at the pivot point. But it's a fairly, this is a fairly heavy-duty bearing assembly. All stainless steel Allen head fasteners anchoring the cover plate and the stainless steel bearing assembly. And when you move it, it feels like a German machine part. It really glides. It really really works well. Lots of optical things happen in the house, so you don't need much art in the walls. All kinds of great reflections happen. Water, sky, granite. And the homage to LA part, of course, is there. You can look, the garage door is mirrored, so you can primp your car when you drive up there. If there's any bird shit on your car, you can check it out right away. You can primp yourself in your car. And the water piece is really, it's really an urban offering. I mean, it's very much enjoyed. Bicyclists run their fingers through it as they pedal by, skateboarders. Kids are drawn to it like a magnet. It's just a film of water covering the granite that is it's kind of local granite. I mean, I found the rock out by the water, so it's local. And then the concrete armature bones with special apertures. I talked about the big aperture to Japan. Now there's another aperture that's a secret aperture. I call it, I think of it as kind of a human tokonoma. You can creep inside this low ceiling alcove that's in the armature and the bones facing the sea, and with optical clarity look through that 1 foot thick piece of poured in place glass to the view beyond. Another kind of through the looking glass journey. When light enters it from the west, fantastic laser beams are shot all over the space, sometimes V-shaped, sometimes linear like that, all around the room. The top of the house is very participatory. You can talk about the architecture in esoteric ways, but this is a great party house. It's great for beer drinking, partying, raising hell on the beach. And they have volleyball tournaments right out in front. So it works as a party machine as well as a conceptual, cosmological machine. In Las Vegas, the other project. This is a drawing I took to an interview actually on the left to show them. I don't go in and do like a scheme for an interview, but that's a very cheap shot. But I did try to let them understand that I knew something about the site. And this was a competition against Graves, Charles Moore, and Bill Turnbull, and others. And they had an option A and B. Option A was after the interview you have a competition. Option B was have a competition. Option A was they just give it to whoever they liked at the interview. So as we left the interview, we said, "Make our day with option A," and they did. Didn't have to be a competition. and we built this project. And it's on the site of original Las Vegas. Las Vegas in Spanish means the meadows. There's a water source, an artesian water source that made that possible. The wedge driven through what started out as an orthogonal plan points north toward a particular mountain. The model shot on the right showed the Las Vegas skyline. The tail of the wedge, this flotsam in the wake of the wedge as it drove through the orthogonal plan, the conical birthday room shaped like a birthday hat, the mad scientist tower spiraling to the sky where they'll affix appurtenances for scientific experiments. There'll be a heliostat installed, be used for acoustic experiments and gravity experiments within. Positioned against the mountain range beyond. The wedge blasting through and out the other end, pointing to the mountain. My drawing on the right, which is a staff terrace. The wedge splits, program library on the right, and Kids Museum on the left. That just finished up this year. The kaleidoscope is a big participatory kaleidoscope. You can look from the kids' library out at the city, the changing sky of the city, the lights, sunrise, sunset, track the sun. And the left is a view down the tower with the aircraft clearance light on. See, this is my idea of you make people work out. Like you put this in there, and they don't have any choice. House that's nearing completion near Phoenix. I got to wrap it up fast because Rosemarie, you told me about 45 minutes to an hour, something like that. 45. Well, we started late, so I'm pressing it, but I'm going to go fast now. The Winandi house, I had to use tile. I had to do a tile roof, and by covenant in this area. And at first I turned it down, and the owners talked me into doing it. So I decided to figure out how to subvert the tile. Tile suggests this Pompeian thing. I mean, you can't. I think it's hard to do unless you're Bruce Goff. You could do it. Use tile in other ways. So okay, I bought into that idea of a courtyard house. But I decided to float the roof, and instead of having, say, woodsy trusses supporting it, have steel trusses, levitate the roof, this visual mass floated above sandblast CMU walls, and the inner lining, do it black stucco from that slot where the trusses cantilever over the inner lining, do it black from 6/8 down and white from 6/8 up, so light is caught, reflected down, but absorbed at the level that you walk around. So the arcade, the ambulatory is very somber. Black stucco, blue water, blue sky through the slot. And then to think of the fire, think of fire ceremonially in the desert, have a window where you look through fire to the sunset. And that's not a very good shot on the right, but it's almost complete now. So that's the fireplace looking west to the sunset, the ambulatory wrapping around. That the stucco's not on it yet. It'll be on the slide on the right. Just see the framing. Got away with Hope windows on this. Kind of son of Landshark there in masonry. That's a guest house with a bleacher vantage point above it, looking out over the desert. Zuber House in Phoenix, embedded in the mountain with a bridge that, it's best to say this in Spanish, este puente no va a ningún lado, pero como una pista inconclusa transporta usted a cualquier lugar. It sounds really poetic in Spanish, so those of you who understood that get the benefit of the poetics there. Oh, and in short, it's a bridge that goes nowhere but takes you anywhere. The water issues from the mountain, flows down to the central gallery of the house under the underbelly of the master bedroom above, which is like a cockpit in the right slide. And just two very current projects just starting. UC Davis, the social sciences and Humanities Building. First drawings to understand the valley, the coastal range, the Sierras, the inductive principle of how geologically the plates are moving, which in the scheme kind of hurls pieces up out of the ground. In that first clay model I did, ground plane is cut into in a river, meander, or eddy kind of idea. Pieces hurled out of the ground plane, pieces embedded in the ground plane, great energy stuff because of the thermal stability of going in the ground. So that's how I'm working now, clay model sketch, refined to a tighter model. Now we're doing a big model I haven't done yet. Sketches along the way, silvery, I call these land trout, silvery silvery pieces that are mainly office intensive. It's just a kind of a rabbit warren of office spaces of all the humanities and social science offices and departments. This is just got SD approval last Thursday, and it's rolling. And you see Santa Cruz. Wanted to understand the meadow there, so I did these drawings showing bright sun, fog, mist, sunset, night from our site for the music building there and concert hall across the meadow. And it's a meadow, a building. We're looking very tentatively at a project there for McGuire Thomas, 500,000 square foot office building. This is just a study to get an attitude about site, which to me was snuggle up against the forest, create passages through office blocks that are gateways to the forest, orient high amenity spaces, war rooms, boardrooms, that stuff, to the forest. There's another agenda in this called the Art of War. We got that ancient treatise that a lot of business people use to plan aggressive business strategies, and we're going to try to use it on IBM and McGuire Thomas. And I told them that, our clients, that we were going to do that, to try to to get beyond just sort of another spec office building party. And so the Art of War will figure in the scheme. It's the illusory corporation reflected in the reflecting piece that covers a subterranean parking area, and then the actual corporation on the right slide that you'd see from the highway, and the gateways to the forest between each arm of the other part of the structure. It's a big long Texas snake also. I don't know if you could see that, and it's a snake. It's a rattlesnake. This is the end. Believe me, it is. A diagram for the US OC, the Olympic Committee Hall of Fame and Exhibit Hall, that we're kind of stalled on, but it had to do processionally with another project we're working on at the same time. U.S. Pavilion for Seville '92. This was an invited competition that included, I think, Gary, Venturi, Pelli, Architectonica, us, Barton Myers. And I thought that instead of doing a lot of technological posturing in Seville, it was important to talk about America. So it's called America the Beautiful. So it has a Purple Mountain Majesty, and that's like an airplane wing, and it's a theater that is hydraulically raised. It's the conical thing. To the right of that are scrims upon which projections can be placed of spacious skies. There are amber waves of grain just below that, a tilted wheat piece that you see on the right, courtesy of Jack Linner, Larson, and Seisel, and projections of spacious skies on the scrims. Kansas Fields on a scrim that goes across sea to shining sea, 2 walls of water, inspired by the scene when, in the Ten Commandments when Moses parts the waters. It's on the right. And then on the left, Brotherhood, the levitating conical theater with intense light and cooling mist issuing from its perimeter as the Purple Mountain Majesty, which is titanium, aluminum, whatever was affordable, airplane wing system, levitates. So the cooling mist, the bright light, drawing one within, and that could be thought of as maybe a movie also. So the techno stuff is there, but it's in the service of America the Beautiful. And if you're a Bulgarian, you don't know the lyrics to America the Beautiful, I think you might understand that it's kind of a landscape thing, and it's about an egalitarian loss of nationality in the mist, in the obscuring mist. Oh, fruited plain. There's a grid of apple trees, which the deal was Washington apple growers would donate the trees. They're mature trees, and they would be donated finally to the farmers of Seville, or of Spain. So they would go from blossom, you see there was another phase, you see on the right slide, to fruition. So we had a drop-in component of fruited apple trees and blossoming apple trees. Now, we didn't win this competition. In the end, the U.S. Information Agency told me that we won the competition. The jury selected our scheme as the winning scheme. It had a professional, an architect on the jury and so forth. But the USIA director overruled that decision, and the scheme was awarded to Barton Myers. And Barton Myers is building his scheme, and it's a very fine scheme. But of course, I'm desperately jealous, and I just wanted to show it to you. This is one that's not going to get built. But the America the Beautiful, to me, was what the pavilion there should talk about. It should talk about the things that I've learned to love about the country, living as a desert rat for as long as I have, and understanding that it's the place and not the sort of hype associated with it. So this was a diagram of place. Thanks very much. Over to COA.
Anytime we're ready to start. Thanks this evening for inviting us. And as Aaron mentioned, there are the three of us, and we've been.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear. Oh, really?
Raise the mic up.
Oh, perfect. Well. No thanks. Is that any better? Okay, I'll slouch. As Aaron mentioned, there are the three of us, and we've been pursuing architecture together for about the past 10 years, the office being formed in the past 4. Really, I think our interests in architecture lie in that we think of it as a research activity. And in that way, we pursue theoretical works, built works, teaching, and writing. I think we choose to deal with architecture as an ongoing means as opposed to production of an end, which perhaps is a more prevalent idea about only producing projects per se. In this way, I think for us it's sort of an ongoing way of thinking. I think rather than attempting to describe our activity with some kind of absolute, it's, as research should be, it's a means which really operates in 3 primary areas. Go to that. The areas best described, I think, as measurement, experimentation, and production or application. Next slide. Measurement for us is really an idea about ascertaining or fixing, establishing a quantity or degree in terms of a standard. And as Corbusier said, it's a product of selection applied to an established standard. Measurement for us occurs in classification or perception of sites or quantities at hand. Next. The second area would be described as experimentation, and that's really, I suppose, an activity that's carried out to resolve an uncertainty, and it's truly synonymous with research. It's towards the establishment of a standard. It's, I think, akin to possibly a scientific method in that one establishes a hypothesis and then proceeds to either prove or disprove it. The change in that for us is that we like to think of it more as a dialectic with the original hypothesis, and that as we go to disprove or disprove beginning thoughts, the hypothesis can change. So really, it's in a way it's a heuristic activity in that it begins to teach about itself, and things change both within and without. I think you can go again. And then finally, in the area of application or production, this is really a focusing at what's at hand for us, and it's when we use the body of knowledge that we've acquired in the previous activities, we selectively apply them towards realization of a work. The slide on the left is part of a project we were doing that dealt with a section of Wilshire Boulevard, and really the box is a collection or an encapsulation of all the elements and perceptions of the problem at hand. The slide on the right represents a typo photo we produced that was dealing with an idea about dynamic in the metropolis, as you can see. The activity of our office really wishes to reassert the hand of the architect to shape and to direct the forces which affect and construct the city. In this way, we're trying to provide or establish a certain resistance to what we would call hegemonous forces, which were counter to that idea. It's similar to the radical architects in Italy of the 60s. We are trying to establish a critical stance in an area, again, of means and method, and as such, it becomes a meta-method for us. This project, I could call a project, produced in 1985 and 86, was a series of constructions which we called the absolute and autonomous object. And really what they were explorations into ideas about formal relationships, and they were important for us because they began to define a method for thinking about architecture, and it broke with a lot of preconceptions we had up to that point when we were working for other people. Again, about formal relationships and deformations, they're both tectonic and then eventually got more architectonic. They were all formatted the same, began by using found pieces and sort of box of pieces that we used. And the reason they're all formatted the same is we wanted to compare them as a body of work as opposed to the single objects. After that, we started to document them and photograph them, and we thought this was interesting because the shadows themselves in the two-dimensional image become almost a mapping of the object, and the whole thing collapses really for a different kind of understanding. Again, they're trying to resist. So, next. These objects are different from the previous in that I think they begin to take on a more architectonic quality in that whereas all of them are devoid really of program and site, these begin to have a suggestion of site, and one can start to understand them perhaps as architectonic constructs. Putting even larger pieces together, one even can begin to imagine perhaps a more urban landscape. This idea got pushed even further in that we take the photographs, started cutting them up and collaging them together. And it really led us into something which we pursued in a few other works, which I'll show, in that it began to present several perceptions of one thing at the same time. So in a way, this is this, again, collapsed idea about collapsed experience. Next. These are a series of diptychs, and they're similar to the idea about the objects, but in obviously graphic form. What's different about them is that they're using found photographs which have pre-existent meaning. And one could think of them as a Venn diagram. Either they overlap and find a new meaning because of their juxtaposition, or they're completely separated and reinforce their own separate meaning by their contrast. This, again, is pursuing this idea of understanding a mechanism about perception as a nonlinear experience. This was a pamphlet that I think Aaron mentioned that we produced called the Recombinant Images in Los Angeles. And it was a series of multiple exposure photographs that were done in camera. The Recombinant Images in Los Angeles was a further attempt to develop this idea of understanding perception, this time within the city and experience of the city, as being one that's simultaneous and collapsed. Here are examples. This begins to touch upon for us a new idea about an amplified urbanism, and that is thinking of the city now in place of a narrative as a total experience of instantaneous and radiating events. That is, events, readings, scales, morphologies, programs that are all collapsed, collapse of experience. Go to the next. Part of the text, I'll read to you a short passage. The camera as a machine eye registers a series of images. The scrambled syntax implied by these images radically breaks the normative praxis of linear single image cognition. The screen space of the recombinant image acts as a collector and a homogenizer of all events, allowing for the coexistence of the possible with the impossible. And these images embrace chance and the found object for their absolute aesthetic absenteeism, but more importantly, their purpose is to unveil the metropolis in a complex and simultaneous manner as proper to its character. I think at this point we've realized that the what becomes less important than we were photographing, and what replaced it is the how. Again, this idea now about the urban situation that we're confronted with, specifically to Los Angeles now. We as architects are trying to resist the hegemonist forces which are forming the city and perhaps forming architecture itself outside of the hand of the architect. And you can go to the next slide. Instead, we're trying to understand the city now as these previous works were revealing to us, as a place where an idea about structures and programs, etc., coexisting. The slide on the left is a collage showing perhaps an idea about a more modernist tower existing with a low one-story historical building. The slide on the right in Mexico, understanding the ancient city at a border condition clearly contrasted with the modern city which intervenes. Another example we found that we enjoyed is this a fortification in Geneva that clearly marks the boundary as a kind of modernist intervention between the existing older city and the sea, and as such contrast the two. This project was entitled Siteworks, and we did it this past year, and we were investigating a site located in downtown LA. And the site interested us because of its inherently complex and layered condition, in that it's really an incomplete set of structures and substructures that collide. You can go to the next. Again, the idea of a Venn diagram of intersecting urban structures. The Harbor Freeway acts as a slot that separates Bunker Hill from the northwest sector of the city. And the city of blocks to the south is contrasted with the free distribution of towers in Bunker Hill, which we dub the object zone. As it presently stands, the structures are overlaid and some erased. What was produced was a model that was really didactic in that we were trying to prompt a multiplicity of readings about that section of downtown, ideas about scale, velocity, perspective, diagram, direction. The model presents both real and the unreal aspects of the site in a single construction. The result of this, I think, is kind of bombardment of the ideas about perception, in that it's really dense and layered. As an architectural proposition, which was also included in the model, we were trying to develop this idea about clarifying and correcting the underlying structures of these coexistent areas within this part of downtown. What I mean by that is that perhaps if you go back one. Back one more. Yeah. On the slide on the right, you can begin to understand the reading of the two scales, but also the idea that the city of blocks becomes contrasted with the object zone of towers, which is along the left edge of the slide, and really begins to set up this hierarchy where the city becomes readable again. And one more. Yeah, one. There you go. As architects practicing in Los Angeles, we really try and deal with the city at large as well as in the smaller projects we do, because we think it's a responsible position to take to begin to understand the city as a whole, which is a difficult thing here as opposed to perhaps other cities. We did an article for Off Ramp magazine here at SCI-Arc, I guess about 1.5 or 2 years ago, which we were trying to understand the city and how it's structured and develop really a way to read the city. In that, we think that Los Angeles lacks an understanding of hierarchy and contrast, and instead it can exist in a kind of fog where perhaps distinctions get blurred, and then you have this kind of endless homogeneous condition, which when really I think we believe that the character of the city is such that there are parts and zones which coexist, which are very different, and the goal of the thesis was to promote those differences, to clarify them by contrasting them, and in turn, when one creates hierarchy, then the readability of the city is returned. Go ahead. I think LA, it was our belief that LA really isn't a single city, but rather composed of several. And the parts are manifested architecturally as zones, areas, districts. An application of the thesis were two projects which were intentionally contrasted to apply this idea or thesis in two different areas. The first area was along the Broadway corridor downtown, and the second was an area again that we call the object zone. The underlying structure of the Broadway corridor is that it's a zone that's described by a linear condition, a well-defined street wall. The buildings are consistent height and use, being usually office and living space over retail and commercial. The proposal that we did was to infill a parking lot along that zone at about Olympic and Broadway, which is really the termination of this view corridor on Broadway. Existing building being just to the right, more triangular shaped, and the the intervention being the building just to the left of it. The proposal tries to understand the underlying structure of that area and then reinforce it. So it's a building, again, of consistent height and street wall. The use is the same. Perspective on the left showing the view down Broadway. On the right showing the view of the other side of the building where the underlying structure changes and therefore should be contrasted. The building then clipped onto the slab are lower showroom warehouse buildings. The other intervention took place again in the object zone, which is the Bunker Hill area. The underlying structure of that area is where the city of blocks breaks down and it's replaced by towers, which by their nature become objects within a field. Go to the next one. The roadways in that area pass through via tunnels and bridges and really erase the block condition. The proposal we made was to elevate that area on a plinth above the city of blocks and the surrounding blocks, and to allow for the object buildings to exist as a free distribution of buildings and the spaces that result in between. The plinth would house all the services and the parking for the zone, and this would increase the hierarchy of the area again through contrast and contribute towards the readability of the city. Now I'll let Eric continue.
One shouldn't think that we do not build, actually. The built work, which runs in our office in parallel with the theoretical work and research, is at this point sort of an inversion in scale to the urban aspect of the office research. Yet at the same time, again, as Russell was saying, there's an attempt to collapse the significance of each, so they mean one and the same. About 2 years ago, we approached Pink's Restaurant on La Brea and told them they had to do a prototype for a new restaurant. And they were intrigued at that request, and especially at the fee. And really what it became was an extremely sort of simple diagram of a building, taking the ready-made of the billboard from the city as a wall, a filter of sorts. We assumed a program of a very small kitchen and dining area, with the billboard acting as a filter or a screen, at once defining the street edge and also acting as a filter, as I said, to selectively modify the chaotic urban condition. Again, it was on a typical site. That didn't go anywhere with Pink's, and we took that directly into the Bricks restaurant in Venice, which is now just about complete. The context, the site is in Venice, as I said, on near the intersection of Washington and Lincoln. And from our viewpoint, urbanistically, it really lacks any rigor or any sort of tenable positions to reinforce. So the design, in effect, becomes a pause in that chaos. And by becoming a pause or a void, it gains hierarchy and clarity in opposition and, again, resisting the forces of the city, the decay of the city, the lack of order of the city. Actually, why don't you go back one for a moment? Three elevations on the right, and the site plan showing Lincoln running north-south vertical and Washington running left to right. There was an idea about boxing in the site as a strategy, and the program was a bit more complex than the Pink's proposal. It was a drive-through restaurant, and one drove in through underneath a torsion tube, an extension of the screen wall structure, and drove around the site back through to the pickup area, which is, go to the model shot there. Actually, you can see it in the elevation, the drive-through off to the left. The plan, the distribution of the program was a large kitchen area and a rather small dining and serving area, and then the thickened facade or filter shown as a sort of diagonal line in the plan. The model shot on the right, looking from Washington Boulevard, really had to have a presence for sort of chaotic high-speed driving to announce that in fact there was a building here. We don't think of the facade as a sign at all. We really think of it as a pause in the chaos. Again, another elevation and plan. The slide to the left is a view from the parking lot looking back through the screen towards the entry, which is denoted by the column. And frontal elevation showing the collapse of the three-dimensional object behind it, i.e. the restaurant. And now just nearing completion, the building itself. And I think one thing that we found quite interesting is that through the dynamics of motion and speed and driving, one can see the screen sort of as on oblique. It seems quite solid and sort of, again, as a shield resists the city and doesn't allow penetration. And once, sort of for a split second, rotating 90 degrees, you see through and catch part of the sky and the dining room behind it. Again, for us, it's interesting in that the budgets for our jobs are very, very low, typically. And we wanted to make the most use out of the fewest amount of elements possible. So again, to add presence and to sort of filter the experience of the inside of the building, we designed this screen wall, and then basically this modernist box sits behind it. Detail of the screen to the right, showing the torsion tube and the arm, and the column to the left denoting the entry to the restaurant. The drive-up window, which is not complete yet, and a wall of opaque glass, which again modifies in a different way the condition of that portion of the site, which is obviously cars driving by picking up food, and a view from the inside of the restaurant showing the sort of layering that occurs in the modification of the urban condition outside. Another project we're working on right now for this with the City of Los Angeles Parks and Recreation is a prototype bathroom facility for the parks, various parks in Los Angeles. This particular site is in Griffith Park, and we wanted to begin first with a site strategy. So we basically divided the site off into a partie where the yellow and the slided to the right was parking, and then a series of walls became circulation routes going to and from the Greek Theater and to the volleyball court and the bathroom facility itself, which is in the gray portion. Again, thinking of this as a prototype, we designed a prefabricated roof truss system. The current problem really now with the bathrooms in the City of Los Angeles is that they're dark and they smell terrible and there's no ventilation. So we decided to lift the roof up and allow for natural ventilation and natural lighting and some support lighting at night, the two poles you see off to the right. And that whole sort of Corbusian roof floating above a concrete block, cellular structure which held storage areas and provided for storage areas and the distribution of the toilets. This is in addition to a residence in Laguna Beach, and it's actually quite a spectacular site. It's 4 contiguous lots overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's a very complex existing condition. There's a case study type house, which one sees off to the left is a sort of fragmented L shape with a pool which actually penetrates into the house, and a garage condition which is shown as a rectangle off to the right. And one approaches the site on a dirt road, basically on the slide on the left, following that curve, and you end up in a driveway where what we wanted to do basically was, this is an addition for a single woman, and she wanted to keep the existing house for her children to return to, so she had a specific desire to really create almost like a wall condition where we would separate the public to the private condition of the site. And I think actually if you go to the next slide, I can point that out. In the driveway, seeing the sort of public entry to the project, the program was, as I said, I think a master bedroom and bathroom addition along with a pool house. So what you see on the left is a datum wall, which was actually in one of the sketches, which became the line, the demarcation between the public and private zone. The bathroom is quite a solid shape on the public side, and then the disintegration of the facade of the bedroom on the private side in the foreground. And this is just recently completed as well. Again, the public side with the datum wall and the entry, and the master bedroom with the 3 pivot doors which open up to the landscape and to the view to the ocean. That's fine. The slide on the left actually was request of the client. We used the site as really a sort of circulation plateau, if you will, so that she had a desire to walk through the site and sort of circumnavigate the perimeter of the site. And we used the buildings to really create a series of conditions of being out away from the view and then all of a sudden opening one up to the view. Right now, actually on the left, you see a fragment of the bedroom, and then looking from the pool house and bar towards the bedroom itself again. The bathroom up against the datum wall with a skylight off to the left, and the facade opening up to the view of the ocean and the pool on the right. This is another master bedroom and bath addition with actually an extension to a living room on the bottom floor. It's in Pacific Palisades on a typical residential lot, 50 by 150. And the particular condition is a canyon to the rear with just distant views to the south of the ocean and to the north views of the Santa Monica Mountains. Model to the left shows the condition was to keep intact an existing one-story stucco house as sort of found object again, and not to alter it too much. The program then was disposed by the sort of 2-story concrete block volume to the rear, responding to the views, and a new garage towards the front of the site. You see with sort of brown flying plane there. Yeah, go on to the next slide. One sees the addition as an object to the left. This is just now complete actually as well. And in context, showing the silhouetted against the mountain and some other sort of 2-story additions that stack up against it. This view is showing on the slide to the left a fragment of the existing stucco house, and this 2-story concrete block volume with a secondary means of egress that you see to the slide to the right actually. The program was disposed about 2 symmetrically placed towers. The tower to the left held the circulation stair, and the tower to the right held the mechanical and bathroom facilities. Conceptually, it was we thought of it as a concrete volume, and along the center line was a series of steel constructions and skylights that acted as, in one case, off to the right, a link. The skylight actually rotates down and clamps onto the existing house, sort of center line of the ridge of the existing house. And then sectionally, that skylight jumps up and then rotates out of the facade, implying extension into the landscape. These are views from the living room looking up off to the stair leading to the bedroom above, and a sort of light-filled corridor with the first skylight that I described the previous slide. Looking from the stairwell again on the left towards ribbon window, and the slide to the right showing again the sort of zones of circulation, corridor, and the connecting piece, and the layering against the existing house, which is the yellow fragments that you see through the window. And then moving upstairs into the master bedroom, there's the skylight you see off to the left above, and an extension of the balcony out into the landscape, and a corner window which rotates out, breaking the volume and acknowledging the view out to the ocean to the south. And then moving to the front of the project again, a new garage, sheet metal garage with a very severe 16-foot metal wall which bisects actually acknowledges the center of the addition to the rear, and separating the old house and the new house, creating a very sort of intense hierarchy. And the circulation strategy for the site was really redone completely. One now circulates along the peripheral, the boundary condition of the site, along a new wall, sort of squeezed by the garage, and then rotates through a courtyard into the existing house. And then two pieces of metal furniture. One is in the courtyard, formed by the back of the garage and the sort of front of the existing house, and a column which marks the center line of the addition in the existing house, which acts as a sort of column table. This is a new house for an art collector and his family in Glendale. And the street is towards the bottom of the slide on the right, and the site slopes from the street down towards the rear of the site, which is the top of the slide. In addition to that, the site is actually pretty heavily forested with oak trees. The partie is understood as two very distinct objects on the landscape, which are then connected by a steel and glass enclosure at the entry. The collage on the right shows the free plan distribution of the public side, where he plans to show art, and the bar building on the left, which is rather cellular in the spatial construct, contains the bedrooms, and that moves out and extends into the landscape. Both those volumes are then referred to a courtyard, a series of courtyards which act as a datum and sort of march down the landscape, identifying and clarifying the slope. And exploded axonometric to the right, showing the bar building with the master bedroom at the head, and sort of the free plan portion of the building off to the left, with the curtain wall pulled out. And then two collages, spatial propositions, really, looking on the slide to the left, being inside the free plan portion of the house, looking at various art walls and fireplaces stacking up in perspective up towards the entry. And then off to the right from the entry, looking back down through and seeing the oak grove beyond through the curtain wall. Three primary sections, the upper section showing the section through the bedroom portion, the private portion of the residence, middle section cutting through the courtyard, showing the datum and sloping of the site, and the lower section showing the cut through the free plan portion of the building. And then again, another collage off to the right showing the disintegration again of the master bedroom out into the landscape itself. And finally, figure 1 removed. Thank you.
There's still an interest in having a discussion among these people. You're welcome to take a stretch and stay. I wanted to, if we can get Ron, you can come up here.
Should I bring another chair up or some more?
That's all right, I'll stand in the background.
Sorry, we're still.
If we can get these gentlemen sitting in their chairs, and if someone could leave Antoine Predock alone. I wanted to ask both of these people if they could respond to something that they haven't talked about in their talk. And if Jeff, if you can get the other microphone to work, it'd be great. If we can get COA to talk about that which they have carefully edited out of their slides and presentation, though, which they refer to quite often, which is the landscape. And if we can get Antoine to respond. If we could get Antoine to respond to what he keeps saying is at the service of the landscape, namely the technology that gets buried by the amber waves of grain. And maybe we can start with COA and ask them the role of landscape in their work. Does that work?
Hello? What landscape is that?
The role of landscape in your work.
You know, I think it's a really wide open question because for us, especially in the urban work, the notion of landscape is really a field of You want to wait for a minute, or?
Well, if those leaving could please be a little quiet out of respect for those who still want to hear some more from these people, we'd be grateful. In other words, shut up back there.
I think that what you're asking for, if I apply it to our work, is somehow an idea about, well, I can speak for the urban work. The idea of landscape is really a field of objects, a field of experience, right? The recombinant images is about simultaneity of experiences, like seeing from above, seeing through driving through the city, and understanding it in an intellectual way, etc. And that all is landscape in a certain sense, which renders a certain complexity, I think, to any proposal as architecture. But I think that the residential work, which all of a sudden is sort of, for us, usually removed from any sort of built context, in a way, has a completely sort of different scale to it, and then we find ourselves really trying to find significant points in landscapes. The sort of lots that we're building on are very tight as well, and normally we're trying to edit out most of what one sees from those lots and amplifying anything good that we can find. For instance, the project in Laguna Beach has this incredible view, and so everything is sort of donated towards that view.
I can add something to that,
I think, Aaron, that was a really general question about landscape, and I'm going to give a very general answer. I think that we see the relationship of building and landscape being that the building is a response to the landscape, but not a duplication of the landscape. That's where we are trying to get to.
The only thing that I would possibly add to that is I think the thing that's common in both conditions, whether we're dealing with the urban situation or the single-family residence in a more landscaped area, is that I think the architecture always tries to understand the site, as Ron said, and then try and understand its structure, and then to amplify that structure to make it more clear. In few instances, perhaps, as often occurs in an urban situation, one will find no structure or nearing chaos. In that case, I think we would impose a structure upon it.
I think your work deals with inner landscapes, landscapes that they're subjective, and we all have our own inner versions of translations, extrapolations from from extant landscape. In LA, I heard that Mr. T bought a house over in Beverly Hills. He chainsawed all the palm trees down right away. And I think to talk about transformation and respect and response to, respect for and response to an existing landscape, I think that was the best landscape architecture move I've heard of in LA lately. Because I think that LA's a botanical garden of it's another kind of imagined inner landscape. It's nothing to do with origins, LA Basin origins, which were about chaparral, sycamores and washes and occasional cottonwoods. But then, as in your eloquent collages, I mean, it's all up for grabs. There's anybody's take is arguable and at the same time believable. There is no, the datum that the non-datum that exists here throws it all out for grabs.
Maybe we can.
I think Mr. T should get the ASLA award.
Maybe we can have some questions from the audience. I'll try to, if you can say them as loudly as possible, then I'll try and repeat them so everyone can hear them. Anyone have questions? Yeah.
Yeah. You say you live with the site, or you spend a couple of days there. And when I do a site analysis, I maybe spend an hour or 2 hours, and then I run out of things to analyze. I wonder what you do for 2 days, and how do you handle all that information?
Did everyone hear that question? Yes? So I'll repeat it. The question was, this person says that he runs out of things to experience in the site after 2 hours and wonders what the hell Antoine Predock does there for the next day and a half.
Well, you should take a John Cage book along, and it's I don't know if I said 2 days. It's a timeless connection, and it can be in a flash, or it can be camping out forever. I don't think it has to do with physical time spent on site. I carry sites around with me on airplanes in my feelings, and I work on tray tables and airplanes, and I don't think it's a question of time at all. It's a question of intensity and willingness to surrender to place that is actual and place imagined. 2 hours is plenty. Don't worry about it. Want to talk about that?
Other questions? Yes.
What's the word? What's the word?
You both seem to be dealing with specific ideas and perceptions past one and groups have. And I'd like each of the groups to speak about past one and groups have. And I'd like
I think the passage you're referring to on the recombinant images was the absolute aesthetic absenteeism, and that's sort of a twofold result. The first being that we couldn't control it. It was in the camera, and it was really a chance kind of combination of really guessing about how long to expose things and what the overlay would in fact be. So our hand in understanding that as an aesthetic proposition was nulled out, voided. I think that what we found more interesting about it, though, wasn't trying to make perhaps elegant compositions out of those photographs. And this expands into perhaps the question you asked about perception. I think that primarily urbanistically it interests us the most, and specifically in Los Angeles, though I don't think we're absolutely sure why yet. But I think in this city more than others, the way that one understands the city is less about a linear narrative, and it's more about things that coexist. Perhaps this idea about when one is downtown, understanding things from a certain perspective, one recalls being in an airplane flying over the city because it's such a dramatic experience. I mean, if that's just a simple example, those two perceptions really collapse onto one another. Programmatically, I think it happens now in the phenomenon of perhaps a high-rise building, as Rim Koolhaas states, where coexisting programs, which normally really you wouldn't expect to be next to each other, do in fact exist, coexist, and there's this kind of strange chance combination between those things. I heard someone else say that the same thing happens in shopping malls, where you have Sears Candy next to a gun store. So it's just, I think that what we're interested in now is understanding that those kinds of perceptions do occur in the city, and that the narrative is gone. And that affects conception. We're still working on what that means in terms of conception.
It's recombinant. It's not linear, you see.
I think let's talk about the Venice House. It's about perceptual confluences. Isolating the perspectival trick or whatever it is artificial, because it's really a lot of things at once. There are subliminal relationships to that collapse, spatial collapse that any perspective can do. Tactily, the surfaces engage spaces without the house, outside the house. There's a simultaneity of all those things. The ceiling in section. There's a sectional move where the ceiling slopes away. That is also subliminal collapse. But nobody has to know all this is happening. I think responses I've heard is that they feel connected to the sea. They hear the sound of the seas, and it's particularly intensified when the pivot window opens, and there are acoustic reflections that happen as it's in motion, and it can be fixed in different positions. So it isn't all at once thing, and you can't isolate any kind of rigor within that or pattern within it. It's definitely about simultaneity.
I'm interested in your documentation of urban simultaneity and the activities that you showed at the beginning, and then also your propositions of urban prototypes. And initially, one would think that the two are kind of exclusive of each other, but I don't think. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
If I can, I've been asked to repeat the questions. The question, as I understand it, was this gentleman wondered whether there was not an inherent contradiction between the idea of urban simultaneity and urban prototypes.
Right, but I don't think there is a contradiction there. I think it's a very interesting juxtaposition of it.
Okay, well, he wants to know about whether there is a contradiction and juxtaposition.
urban prototypes was a sort of threw me. I mean,
The off-ramp article? Or?
yeah, are you referring to perhaps the propositions that were made in the off-ramp article?
No, the one that you showed,
The urban interventions themselves?
Yeah,
Selected.
Yeah, well, the restaurant isn't really, as a prototype for pinks, that was because those things are repeated usually on similar sites. So, I mean, that's as far as I'd take that one. The restrooms, it's a really isolated condition, so I wouldn't call it urban in parks. I think more, perhaps, when one speaks about prototype, it was this understanding of developing an idea about how to operate within the city, and that's what that thesis was about understanding an idea about underlying structure. And I think what we like about that idea is it's open-ended enough that it's not some kind of perhaps prescribed rule that one operates in, because I think one as an architect can then understand the differences between the underlying structures in the city and apply that idea, even though there are probably very many that exist in the city. So it's really operative as a principle, as opposed to some kind of absolute or prescriptive planning. So.
Well, I mean, I would just say that I think the idea of experience has no structure, just like time has no increment really until we give increment to it. And so I think the difference is, one is, as we posited, a research activity, and it's simultaneous in that it's accepting all possible collisions of experience. And then architecture, it attempts to selectively structure experience. So it again is sort of a Venn diagram, but if one's goal is to have an architecture that can encompass all experience, then it would be like the recombinant images.
Maybe we can get Antoine to respond to these notions of simultaneity.
Well, I live and work in Venice. I know all about it.
How does it show up in your work?
Well, I think it can happen in very subtle levels and very crass levels. And in LA, the only project I've done that's built is the house, and it's well, I think it can happen in very subtle levels and very crass levels. And in LA, the only project I've done that's built is the house, and it's if there's a percentage, it's sort of 90% toward Asia and 10% back toward LA, and it aspires to points beyond the shore, and it is intended to take the participant on a journey out of LA and beyond. And the acknowledgement of the temporality of LA and the glitz of LA is a very minor thing. And that's sort of heavy-handed symbolism, I guess, in terms of quieter, secondary and tertiary absorptions. I mean, it's great to watch the LAX flight pattern, because that's a once removed connection to Asia or any points beyond that you want to imagine, and the house is a great viewing platform for that, just as the Sky Theater at Cal Poly is. I think you just have to keep your feelings and eyes and ears open in LA, because it's speaking to you all the time. It's very hard to be judgmental about it. It's hard to decide what to filter out and what not to. But I guess in terms of the horse's blinders configuration of that house, that's an attitude about filtering.
Can you tell us a bit about the notional scale in designing your buildings?
The what?
The notional scale.
Notional scale.
Design.
Yeah.
Well, I was in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago, And I would say basically used an art. But for going to Las Vegas, I was trying to figure out the dimensions, the actual dimensions of the project, which seem to be much larger than the actual building. And besides that, well, it is a picture of symbol in a cosmological architecture, which is defined by symbols in its own nature. I think that there's a reason that you lose the contact with the science, the nature, with the human dimension in general. And, well, I'm interested.
The question, especially with regard to the Las Vegas Children's Museum and Library, to Antoine Predock, is whether the scale, as it starts to refer to larger cosmological forces, loses touch with the human scale and the scale of the actual physical site.
Is that right?
Yes, our goal is to make the scale.
Yeah. Well, I want to. There's a disclaimer that I want to mention first, that these events like this are performance pieces. They don't have anything to do with architecture, out there. They're part of an organism, a cultural organism. And in being introduced as, I don't know I can't remember what it was, working with mythic things or symbols. I mean, that's hanging around, and I talk about it. But the work is the work. I mean, just if you felt scale discrepancies, good or bad, that's what it's about. It's what you apprehended there in the flesh. I don't. It's scale. I don't know. I don't ever think about scale much. It eludes me. I don't know much about scale or composition in terms of formal attitudes or methodologies. But the scale has a relationship. Its size has a relationship to the big place, big mountains, big plain, big discernible chunks of program that very conveniently sorted themselves out in the rather diagrammatically into the objects you see that comprise the building. The finer grain that one could associate with, quote, human scale, I think is there if it kind of depends on your itinerary. Every building, everything we experience has multiple itineraries. There is, in that birthday room, the conical thing, the Fibonacci series is described in Coke bottle skylights that spiral up and around. There's a reduction of scale there, and an intimacy and a connection to a geometric order that's didactic and overt and almost corny. The kaleidoscopic thing, which is viewed obliquely from vantage points within, is a shattering of a normal kind of view out a window, a fragmentation of an isolated fragmentation of sky, mountains, city. So those, I think those are attitudes about scale. There are little things and big things. Blur your eyes and look at the building. It's more about big things. Stone, the color of the mountains in the distance, a literal connection of red sandstone to Valley of Fire. And when I was working on that, I was teaching a studio at the GSD, and the class flew out from Harvard, met me. We met in Las Vegas, and the class problem was called Learning from the Other Las Vegas, and I was really obsessed with that of a reciprocal of Venturi take on Las Vegas in that building, and how the studio was conducted and what we looked at in the studio, which included mostly things like Michael Heiser's double negative to Hoover Dam in section and the materiality and tectonic qualities of the dam, and not the cultural component that interested Venturi, and that the building in a coarse way deals with those with the other Las Vegas, deals with origins of place and the way water is used, but it is subliminal and not doesn't hit you over the head. So those things, this discussion, this monologue is about, I guess, could be about scale. I mean, scale of experience, scale of object.
Well, mine wasn't really totally true, but rather deal with the elements of design. I mean, how you deal with design and scales, conceiving deal.
I think I know what looks good to me, and I manipulate things in models and in drawings, and I've built a lot of things, so I know how they look when they're built. I mean, I know how certain spaces feel, and I rely on that very heavily. I don't reinvent that each time out. I mean, it's an instinct. Things go along with the white hair. Hopefully. I mean,
Continuation of the earlier question about prototypes and simultaneity. Question is the relationship between the purity or seeming purity of the objects that COA actually builds or proposes to build versus the simultaneity and overlaps in their theoretical projects.
I think the answer to that is actually quite simple, and that is that the simultaneity is product or tied into the perception, and the objects themselves, it is not necessary to try to invest simultaneity in those objects. The perception of the objects tends to do that, and that's the research is more into the way objects are viewed and not into how to create the objects.
and that's much more interesting than trying to do it. It's like the concept of duende in flamenco. Duende visits a site where a flamenco performance may be occurring, and either shows up or it doesn't. You can't look for it. You can't make it happen. It either shows up or not. And Garcia Lorca wrote a great essay dealing with that in a 1928 essay, the idea of how elusive it is. And Henry Miller talked about it in a great way in the Colossus of Marusai, his sort of Greek travelogue. It wasn't one of his dirty books. It was this great travelogue, and talked about a state of aliveness and emptiness that he wanted to dwell in as an artist. And that state of readiness, for me, allows duende to enter. I mean, it makes the possibility exist, and you don't try for it. You don't say, oh, I'm going to get into simultaneity, because that's an ambush that you've set up for yourself.
We have no further questions. I guess it's time to thank, we can actually now identify them for those who don't know who's who, Eric and Russell and Tom, and Antoine Predock for joining us tonight. Thank you very much.